At my daughter's birthday, I found her cake fed to the dogs. My sister smirked and said she is just a mistake anyway. I picked my little girl up and left. The next morning, my mother sobbed through the phone, begging me to call the lender because they were canceling my sister's $50,000 wedding. I simply said honestly, I do not care. Then I hung up while she started yelling. Welcome back to Quiet Reckonings. This is the channel for the people who were always told they were the strong ones, the ones who finally stopped apologizing for it. If a story like this finds you tonight, you are not alone here. My name is Lorelei. I am 34 years old, a forensic accountant, and a single mother to a beautiful, quiet 7-year-old girl named Marigold. In my family, the roles were handed out the day we were born, written in invisible ink but enforced like constitutional law. There was Valencia, my younger sister, who needed things. And then there was me, who provided them. My mother Daphne decided very early on that Valencia was fragile, special, and deserving of a soft life. She was the golden child, the one whose mediocre achievements were celebrated with grand dinners, while my actual milestones were treated as basic expectations. I was the sturdy one. The one who could take a hit. The one who never needed rescuing, which somehow translated to the one who didn't deserve any help at all. I learned to do my own laundry by the time I was 10 because Daphne was too busy helping Valencia with her elementary school art projects. I paid for my own college by working double shifts at a diner, coming home smelling like stale coffee and bleach. I bought my own car, a reliable used sedan, entirely in cash. I built a career out of tracking down missing money for large corporations, analyzing financial fraud, and putting together puzzle pieces that people tried very hard to hide. I was good at it because I am logical. I do not panic. I look at numbers, and the numbers never lie. They tell a story of human behavior, of greed, of entitlement. Ironically, I spent my days uncovering the deceit of strangers, yet for 30 years, I completely failed to audit my own family. Logic never worked in my bloodline. Emotion, manipulation, and guilt were the currencies they traded in. To truly understand how deep this dysfunction ran, you have to look at the museum of pain I carried with me. 5 years ago, Valencia begged to borrow my car for a weekend trip with her friends to the coast. She swore she would be careful. She gave me this big, theatrical speech about how she just needed a break to clear her head. She came back on Sunday night with the front bumper completely smashed in, the headlight shattered into 100 pieces, and 3 speeding tickets sitting casually in the glove compartment. She didn't even apologize. She just tossed the keys on my kitchen counter and said some guy backed into her, though the damage clearly showed she had rear-ended someone. When I took the car to the mechanic, the repair estimate came out to $2,500. I laid that printed piece of paper on my mother's kitchen table. Daphne looked at me like I was the one who had committed a crime. I can still see the way she crossed her arms, her jewelry clinking, as she sighed that heavy, exhausted sigh she always reserved for me. She told me Valencia was going through a hard time because she had just failed her real estate exam for the 2nd time. She said Valencia was severely depressed and that demanding money from her right now would push her over the edge. You are making good money, Lorelei, she said, leaning forward to tap the table. Just pay for it. Be the bigger person. Do not ruin her week over a piece of metal. Family helps family. Family helps family. That was the weaponized phrase they used to pick my pockets. So I paid it. I swallowed the burning anger in my chest, I drained my savings account, and I paid it because that was my job. I was the family cleanup crew. I fixed the messes, I absorbed the cost, and I kept the peace. I convinced myself that this was what love looked like. That by carrying their burdens, I was earning my place at their table. But everything changed the year Marigold turned 7. Marigold is the opposite of Valencia. She is thoughtful, she says please and thank you, and she never asks for anything she knows I cannot give. I had planned a quiet, perfect afternoon for her birthday. I ordered a beautiful vanilla cake with bright blue frosting, her absolute favorite color, from an artisan bakery across town. I bought white and gold balloons. I took the entire day off work. I was going to make it entirely about her. Then my phone rang. It was Daphne. She did not call to say happy birthday to her granddaughter. She called to announce that they were throwing a massive, last-minute engagement party for Valencia and her fiancé Holden that exact same Saturday. Holden came from a family that liked to pretend they had old money, and Valencia was obsessed with keeping up appearances. My mother casually suggested that I just bring Marigold over to the house. "We can just fold her little birthday thing into the engagement party," Daphne said, her voice breezy and dismissive. "It will be easier for everyone. Why have two parties when we can just do it all at once? Plus, Holden's family is coming, and we need it to look full and lively." Easier. That word again. It always meant easier for them, and harder for me. Easier for Valencia to steal the spotlight. Easier for Daphne to avoid organizing two separate events. I should have said no. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to say no, to protect my daughter's special day. But 30 years of conditioning is a hard thing to break. I looked at Marigold, who was sitting on the living room rug, happily coloring. She loved her grandmother. She had been talking about showing Daphne her new dress all week. I heard myself saying, "Sure, Mom, that is fine." I agreed because that was the script, and I had been reading my lines flawlessly since I was a child. I packed up the beautiful blue cake in its pristine white box. I helped Marigold put on her best dress. I buckled her into the car, telling myself that it would be okay, that maybe, just this once, they would make room for her. I had no idea I was walking into the exact moment that would break my family apart forever. I had no idea what was waiting for me in that house and how it would change the trajectory of all our lives. Will I ever learn to stop saying yes? The drive to my mother's house took exactly 30 minutes. I spent the entire time gripping the steering wheel, trying to talk myself out of the low-level anxiety that always hummed in my veins before a family gathering. Marigold sat quietly in the back seat, carefully holding a piece of construction paper. It was a drawing she had made specifically for the occasion. It was a picture of our family, drawn in bright crayons, meant as a gift for her grandmother. She was so proud of it. She kept asking me from the back seat, "Do you think Grandma will put it on the refrigerator?" I looked at her hopeful little face in the rearview mirror and forced a smile. I promised her she would. When we pulled up to the residential street, I could barely recognize my childhood home. There was absolutely no sign of a 7-year-old's birthday. The entire front porch was draped in expensive white silk fabric and towering gold floral arrangements. Valet parkers in matching vests were moving luxury cars up and down the driveway. I had to park 3 blocks away and walk back with Marigold holding my hand and the heavy cake box balancing on my other arm. Inside, the house had been transformed into a shrine dedicated entirely to Valencia's ego. A massive champagne tower stood in the center of the living room, bubbling and glowing under the recessed lights. Caterers in black uniforms were walking around with silver trays of caviar and shrimp. A string quartet was playing softly in the corner. It was ostentatious. It was a performance. I found Daphne in the kitchen, fussing aggressively over a stack of custom linen napkins printed with Valencia and Holden's initials in gold foil. I carefully placed Marigold's blue birthday cake on the far corner of the counter, pushing it back so it was safely out of the way of the catering staff. Daphne gave me a quick, distracted hug, her eyes darting around the room to make sure everything was perfect. She patted Marigold on the head without really looking down at her. Marigold held up her crayon drawing, her little voice piping up to say happy weekend, Grandma. But Daphne had already turned away, her attention captured by the arrival of Holden's mother, Zara. Zara was a woman who wore too much heavy jewelry and spoke entirely in name drops and subtle insults. She glided into the kitchen, loudly announcing to anyone who would listen that her son deserved a wedding that reflected his high social status. Valencia was trailing right behind her, wearing a designer white sundress that probably cost more than my first car, nodding eagerly and laughing at everything Zara said. I watched Aunt Jocelyn, my mother's older sister, walk past us. Aunt Jocelyn was the self-appointed moral judge of the family. She spent her days posting passive-aggressive quotes about loyalty and family values on social media, while spending her nights tearing people down in private group chats. Marigold smiled brightly and said hello to her. Jocelyn barely glanced down, muttered a tight-lipped greeting, and kept walking straight toward the open bar. I felt that familiar cold, heavy knot forming in the pit of my stomach. The rule of the strong one was kicking in, whispering in my ear. Do not make a scene. Let Valencia have her day. Do not make this about you. It is just a few hours. Just endure it. Suddenly, Daphne appeared right next to me, her fingers gripping my arm tightly. She pulled me physically away from Marigold and into the narrow, dark hallway leading to the garage, away from the guests and the noise. She lowered her voice, looking around nervously as if we were doing a drug deal. Listen, Lorelai, she whispered rapidly. I have some old trust fund documents from your grandmother that need to be updated. It is just standard banking stuff, completely boring. I need your signature as Marigold's guardian to clear out the old accounts and close them out properly. I will bring the papers by your house next week. Just sign them quickly when I bring them so we can be done with all this legal nonsense. I frowned, my professional instincts immediately flaring up. My grandmother had passed away 3 years ago. The estate had been settled. I asked her why these specific documents were suddenly so urgent right now, right in the middle of an engagement party. Daphne waved her hand dismissively, her jaw tightening with irritation. It is just paperwork, Lorelai, she snapped, her tone turning sharp. Stop being so intensely suspicious all the time. It is exhausting. Just do it when I bring it, okay? Before I could ask any more questions, she spun on her heel and hurried back into the living room to clink her crystal glass with a silver spoon, calling for everyone's attention for a toast. I stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the weird interaction settle. I pushed it to the back of my mind, assuming it was just more of Daphne's scattered, disorganized financial housekeeping. I had bigger things to worry about today. The toasts went on for over an hour and a half. Holden stood up and talked endlessly about how Valencia was a literal queen who deserved the entire world. Valencia cried perfectly curated, camera-ready tears while a hired photographer snapped photos. Everyone clapped. Everyone cheered. Marigold stood quietly by my leg the entire time. Her drawing was still clutched in her small hand, the edges getting soft and crumpled from the sweat of her palms. She looked up at me with those big, patient, devastatingly innocent eyes and asked softly, Mommy, when is it time for my cake? I smiled down at her, stroking her soft hair, and told her it was time right now. I walked back into the kitchen, navigating through the crowd of laughing relatives, intending to grab the beautiful blue vanilla cake, light the 7 candles, and sing to my daughter. I looked at the corner of the counter where I had carefully left it. The counter was completely empty. The white bakery box was gone. I checked the dining room table. I checked the side tables in the hall. Nothing. A cold sense of absolute dread washed over my entire body. I turned around and headed toward the heavy glass doors leading to the backyard, wondering what on earth could have happened to it. What kind of family does this? I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the wide stone patio. The afternoon sun was bright and warm, but the air in my lungs suddenly felt like freezing water. Down on the manicured green lawn, near the edge of the rose bushes, Aunt Jocelyn's 2 large, hyperactive poodles were aggressively tearing into something on the ground. I took a slow step closer, my eyes adjusting to the bright light. Smeared across the grass, mixed heavily with dark dirt and dog saliva, was bright blue vanilla frosting. The thick cardboard cake board was flipped upside down, its edges ripped and chewed. Half of the carefully piped white letters spelling my daughter's name were completely destroyed, crushed into the soil. They had taken my child's birthday cake. They had carried it out of the house, and they had tossed it onto the lawn for the dogs to eat. I froze. I could hear the wet, heavy sound of the dogs chewing and panting. And then, cutting through the warm afternoon air, I heard laughter. I looked up sharply. Valencia was standing on the raised wooden deck overlooking the yard. She was holding a tall crystal glass of champagne, surrounded by 3 of her giggling bridesmaids. They were all looking down at the dogs, pointing and laughing as if it were the funniest joke in the world. I walked toward the deck, my footsteps heavy on the stone. My voice was dangerously quiet, stripped of any emotion. Who did this? I asked. Valencia turned around slowly. She did not look guilty. She did not flinch. She did not even look remotely surprised. She just rolled her eyes, let out a dramatic sigh, and took a slow sip of her drink. "Oh, relax, Lorelei," she said, waving her free hand. The caterers needed the counter space for the chocolate fondue fountain. The box was in the way. It was just some cheap grocery store cake anyway. "It was not a grocery store cake," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it made my vision blur. "It was her birthday cake. You threw my child's birthday cake to the dogs." One of the bridesmaids shifted uncomfortably and looked down at her expensive shoes, but Valencia just smirked. That ugly, deeply entitled smirk she had worn her entire life when she knew she could get away with murder. She leaned over the wooden railing, looking right down into my eyes, and delivered the sentence that finally, permanently, broke the spell of my childhood. "Honestly, she doesn't deserve nice things anyway. She's just a mistake. You should be grateful we even let her come today." A mistake. She called my 7-year-old daughter a mistake. Because I was a single mother. Because I did not have a wealthy, pretentious fiancé like Holden. Because my life was built on hard work instead of a shiny, fake performance. I heard a small, sharp intake of breath right behind me. I turned around. Marigold was standing in the doorway of the patio. Her eyes were wide, taking in the sight of the dogs eating her blue cake. She had heard every single word Valencia said. Her little hands slowly lowered to her sides, and the drawing she had made with such love for Daphne slipped from her fingers. It fluttered to the patio floor, landing face down on the stone. Right then, in that exact second, the sister who fixed things died. The obedient daughter who took the hits and kept the peace died. Only the mother remained. And a mother protecting her young is a very dangerous thing. I did not scream. I did not throw a drink in Valencia's face, even though every cell in my body wanted to tear that wooden deck apart with my bare hands. Screaming is what powerless people do. I walked over to my daughter. I knelt down on the hard stone, picked up her drawing, and gently wiped a single tear that was threatening to spill from her eye. "Let's go home, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice incredibly steady. "You are worth 1,000,000 cakes." I picked her up, resting her head on my shoulder. I walked straight back through the house. I walked past the champagne fountain, past Daphne, past Zara, past all the people who were supposed to be my family. Daphne called my name, her voice shrill, asking where I was going and telling me not to be dramatic. I did not stop. I did not look back. We stopped at a local bakery on the drive home. We walked the aisles together, and we bought the biggest, most beautiful chocolate cake they had in the entire display case. We went back to our quiet, safe house. I cleared the kitchen table, lit the 7 candles, and sang the song, just the two of us. Marigold smiled again, her face glowing in the warm candlelight, frosting on her chin, and I made a silent, unbreakable vow. I would never, ever let those people make her feel small again. I was severing the tie. I put her to bed, tucking the blankets tightly around her. I sat in my dark living room, staring blindly at the wall, finally accepting that my family was toxic beyond repair. I was done with them. I thought cutting contact would be the end of the drama. I thought the absolute worst thing they could do to me was break a child's heart over a cake. At 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone lit up on the dark coffee table. It vibrated violently, breaking the silence of the house. It was an automated email alert from my credit monitoring app. A notification that would normally mean a simple clerical error for most people, but in my line of work, it meant someone had breached the walls. I opened the email. The glowing screen illuminated the darkness. And the nightmare truly began. What had they done in my name? The alert flashing on my screen was a hard inquiry on my credit report. Someone, somewhere, had checked my credit file to open a new line of credit. I am a forensic accountant. I spend 40 to 50 hours a week diving into massive, convoluted financial statements, looking for tiny anomalies, missing funds, and hidden shell companies for multinational corporations. I know exactly what a normal bank system error looks like, and I know exactly what a human hand trying to steal looks like. In that moment, sitting in the dark, the hurt sister vanished completely. The investigator clocked in. The cold, analytical part of my brain took over the controls. I grabbed my work laptop, carried it into the kitchen, turned on the harsh overhead light, and started pulling up every single financial account connected to my Social Security number. Checking accounts, savings, investments, and credit cards. I went through them methodically, row by row. Then I logged into an old legacy banking portal. 3 years ago, when Daphne had a minor medical procedure, she played the helpless victim and asked me to co-sign a joint credit card account with her to help manage her medical bills. I had agreed, like the obedient, problem-solving daughter I was raised to be. A year later, Daphne quietly, without asking me, added Valencia as an authorized user to that exact same account. When I found out by accident, I had called the bank furiously to close the account. But because it was an archaic legacy system, the bank representative explained that they required all 3 named account holders to appear in person at a physical branch to dissolve it and sign the closure forms. Daphne always found a convenient excuse to delay the trip. So the account sat there, dormant, frozen in a bureaucratic limbo, with my name acting as the primary guarantor. I opened the digital statement for that joint account, my eyes scanning the recent activity tab. There it was. A pending charge posted just 3 days ago. $6,800. I stared at the merchant line. The letters burned into my vision. It read, Maplewood Estates and Events LLC. Maplewood Estates was the ultra-luxury wedding venue Valencia had been bragging about all afternoon. It was an exclusive, high-end property out past the county line that charged an absolute fortune just to walk through the wrought iron gates. Valencia and Holden did not have that kind of money. Holden was perpetually between vague tech startups, which is a polite way of saying he was unemployed, and Valencia spent her entire paycheck on designer clothes, bottomless brunches, and maintaining a lifestyle she could not afford. I sat back in my chair, the silence of my kitchen ringing loudly in my ears. She had used the joint card. She had intentionally pulled out a piece of plastic with my name tied to it, and she had used my excellent credit line to pay the massive, non-refundable deposit for her dream wedding. A memory flashed vividly in my mind, a puzzle piece snapping into place. 2 years ago, Valencia had organized a lavish bachelorette weekend for one of her sorority friends. She aggressively demanded $1,000 from each of the 5 bridesmaids for a luxury villa rental by the beach. But she secretly booked a much cheaper, run-down motel further inland and pocketed the massive difference to buy herself a limited-edition designer handbag. When she eventually got caught because one of the girls found the real receipt, she cried uncontrollably, played the victim, and claimed it was an honest administrative mistake that she was going to fix. This was not a mistake. This charge to Maplewood Estates was not an accident. This was a calculated pattern of behavior. She was greedy, she was intensely entitled, and she truly, deeply believed that what was mine was automatically hers to take. I felt a sickening, twisting pain in my stomach, but the forensic accountant in me knew this was just the surface level of the crime. A $6,800 charge on an existing credit card would trigger a balance alert, yes. But it would absolutely not trigger a hard inquiry on my overall Equifax credit report. A hard inquiry only happens when someone is trying to open a brand new, unsecured line of credit. I needed to see the full, terrifying picture. I logged directly into Equifax, paid the premium fee for the instant, detailed report, and downloaded the massive PDF file to my desktop. I scrolled past my mortgage details, my car loan history, and my personal credit cards. I held my breath as I reached the section for newly opened accounts. My breath caught painfully in my throat. I stopped scrolling. I had found the real monster hiding in the data, and it was so much worse than a stolen wedding deposit. How far had she really gone? Right there on my screen, under the bolded section for unsecured personal loans, was an active, fully approved line of credit from a major online lending institution. The loan amount was for a staggering $15,000. According to the timestamps on the report, it had been applied for exactly 10 days ago. It had been approved, finalized, and disbursed directly to a routing number yesterday afternoon, while I was busy picking up balloons for Marigold's birthday. The primary name listed on the loan document was Lorelei. The social security number used to verify the identity was mine. But the contact email address attached to the digital account was a clever variation of Valencia's name, and the physical mailing address on file was Daphne's house. I sat perfectly still in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. She did not just borrow an old joint credit card to pay a venue. She had actively, maliciously stolen my identity. To get an online, unsecured personal loan of that size, you cannot just guess a few numbers. You need the applicant's full legal name, their exact date of birth, their full social security number, their gross annual income down to the dollar, and their detailed employment history. Valencia had lived in my shadow long enough to know all of those intimate details. She had meticulously, deliberately typed my private information into a lending portal, forged my digital signature by checking the legal consent boxes, and taken out $15,000 of high-interest debt entirely in my name. Combined with the venue deposit, my sister had stolen almost $21,000 from me in the span of a week and a half. All to aggressively fund a $50,000 fantasy wedding to impress a man who didn't even have a job, and a future mother-in-law who looked down on everyone. If I missed a single monthly payment on that massive loan, my pristine credit score would tank instantly. My career, which requires strict, ongoing financial background checks and security clearances to handle corporate funds, could be severely jeopardized. I could literally lose my job. Valencia had not just taken my money, she had risked my livelihood. She had risked my ability to pay my mortgage and feed my own child. The very child she had casually, cruelly called a mistake while laughing with her friends. The lingering sadness and betrayal I had felt earlier that afternoon on the patio evaporated completely. It burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp, terrifying clarity that settled deep in my bones. In my line of work, we have a very specific philosophy. You do not fight a lie with anger. You fight a lie with paper. My family loved to control the narrative. They were masters of spin. They loved to twist the story so that I was always the crazy, overly sensitive, unforgiving one, while Valencia was the innocent, misunderstood victim who just made a tiny oopsie. If I called Daphne right now and screamed at her through the phone, she would twist it immediately. She would say I was jealous of the wedding. She would say I was ruining Valencia's happiness over a misunderstanding. She would rally the entire extended family to call me a monster. I wasn't going to give them a story they could spin. I was going to give them an undeniable, legally binding paper trail. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked into my home office. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope from my filing cabinet. In my mind, I named it the envelope of justice. I printed the entire Equifax credit report, taking a red pen and highlighting the fraudulent $15,000 loan. I printed the digital statement from the old joint account, drawing a heavy dark circle around the $6,800 charge to Maplewood Estates. I dug into the loan application metadata and took screenshots of the digital signature logs, proving definitively that the IP address used to submit the fraudulent loan application belonged directly to Daphne's home Wi-Fi network. I stacked the papers neatly, ensuring every single corner was aligned perfectly, and slid them into the manila envelope. Every piece of paper in there was a heavy iron nail in the coffin of Valencia's ridiculous wedding. I looked up at the wall clock. It was almost 5 in the morning. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting a pale, cold gray light through the kitchen window. The birds were starting to sing. I walked softly down the hall and went into Marigold's room. She was sleeping soundly, breathing softly, her favorite stuffed bear tucked securely under her arm. I stood there for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall. I leaned down and gently kissed her warm forehead. I walked back out to the kitchen, picked up my car keys, and grabbed the thick manila envelope. I was not going to wait for regular business hours. I was not going to call my mother to demand an explanation. I was going to end this. What would the police say? The local police station was quiet and brightly lit when I walked in at 6 in the morning. The air smelled strongly of stale coffee and floor wax. I walked straight up to the heavy glass partition at the front desk, placed my thick manila envelope on the counter, and told the desk sergeant in a calm, flat voice that I needed to file a formal criminal report for identity theft and wire fraud. The officer blinked, clearly surprised by my lack of hysteria, and called a detective over to take my official statement. I sat in a small, windowless room and walked him through the entire timeline. I showed him the joint account statement, the unauthorized venue charge, and the massive fraudulent personal loan. I pointed out the IP address logs tying the loan application directly to my mother's residential address, effectively proving that Valencia had executed the fraud from inside Daphne's house. Because the total stolen amount was well over $20,000, the detective informed me it easily crossed the threshold into felony territory. He typed up the report, gave me an official police report number, and handed me a physically stamped copy of my sworn statement. That piece of paper was my ultimate shield. It was the absolute end of their control over me. I drove back to my house, arriving just before 8 in the morning. I made myself a strong cup of black coffee, sat down at my desk, and picked up the phone to call the fraud department of the bank that held the joint credit card account. I did not ask for a favor. I read them the police report number. I stated clearly and firmly that the $6,800 charge to Maplewood Estates was entirely fraudulent. I instructed them to freeze the account permanently and initiate an immediate, aggressive clawback of the funds. A clawback is a beautiful mechanism in banking. It means the bank reaches directly into the merchant's account and rips the money back out by force. The luxury venue would see the payment fail dramatically, and Valencia's deposit would vanish into thin air. Next, I dialed the online lending institution. I gave their fraud division the exact same police report number. I informed them that the $15,000 loan was opened using stolen identity credentials and forged signatures. I demanded an immediate, hard fraud freeze on the account and the disbursed funds. By noon that Monday, the traps were completely set. The financial lifelines secretly funding the grand wedding were completely severed, bleeding out without anyone noticing yet. I did not text Valencia. I did not call Daphne to scream. I simply went about my life. For 14 agonizingly slow days, I lived in total, absolute silence. I went to work and investigated corporate fraud. I took Marigold to the park and pushed her on the swings. I helped her with her math homework at the kitchen table. I cooked dinner. It was strangely the most peaceful 2 weeks I had experienced in my entire adult life. I knew exactly what was happening behind the scenes in the banking world, but I let the slow, grinding, merciless wheels of the financial system do all the talking for me. I knew Maplewood Estates would not call Valencia immediately. Venues usually have a grace period for failed payments to clear. I knew the online lender would take at least a week to process the heavy fraud claim and legally freeze the disbursed funds sitting in Valencia's bank account. They were living in a blissful fantasy. Valencia was probably printing expensive gold foil invitations and tasting expensive cake flavors, completely unaware that she was standing directly on a financial trapdoor, and I was the one holding the lever. On the morning of the 15th day, I was standing in my kitchen making blueberry pancakes for Marigold before school. The sun was shining brightly through the window. The sweet smell of vanilla and butter filled the house. My phone started vibrating aggressively on the counter. The caller ID flashed brightly. It was Daphne. I let it ring 3 full times, watching the screen light up. Then I picked it up. Before I could even say a single word, the piercing sound of Daphne's hysterical, breathless, terrified sobbing blasted through the speaker. "Lorelei. Oh my God, Lorelei, you have to help us," she screamed, her voice breaking in pure panic. "The venue just called. They said the deposit bounced. They are canceling the reservation. And Valencia's bank account is completely locked. The lender is demanding all the money back immediately. They are canceling the wedding. Please, please, call the bank and fix it. You always know how to fix it." I held the phone to my ear, listening to the absolute chaos of the world they had built crashing down around them. I looked across the kitchen at Marigold, who was happily eating her pancakes, safe, protected, and loved. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the power of 30 years of silence finally speak. If you're enjoying the story so far and love seeing toxic families get their reality check, Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you are living in. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much for your support. I held the phone to my ear and listened to the absolute chaos of the world they had built crashing down around them. Daphne was gasping for air between her sobs, the kind of wet, ugly crying she usually saved for funerals or when she wanted to manipulate a car salesman. She kept repeating my name like it was a magic spell that could somehow put $21,000 back into their pockets. "Lorelai, you have to fix this," she wailed, her voice echoing in my quiet kitchen. "Valencia is on the floor. She cannot even breathe." The venue sent a formal cancellation notice. The online bank locked her checking account. "They're saying it is fraud. You have to call them and tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized it." I looked down at my coffee. It was perfectly black, perfectly still. I did not feel the usual panic that Daphne's tears used to trigger in me. For 30 years, her crying meant I had to drop everything and become the savior. Now, it just sounded like background noise. "Mom," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any warmth. "I am not calling the venue. And I am certainly not calling the bank to lie for her." There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end of the line. The crying stopped instantly, replaced by a cold, hard shock. Daphne genuinely could not compute what she had just heard. In all my 34 years, I had never once refused to clean up a family mess. "What do you mean you are not calling?" Daphne demanded, her tone shifting from a pleading mother to an angry dictator. "Lorelai, this is your sister's wedding. This is her dream. She just made a tiny mistake with the paperwork. She thought she was using the family card. You have plenty of money. You are being completely unreasonable over a technicality." "A technicality," I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air. "She used my social security number to take out a $15,000 loan. She forged my signature on a venue contract. That is not a technicality, Mom. That is felony identity theft. And I am the one who reported it." Daphne gasped. It was a loud, dramatic intake of breath. "You did what? You reported your own sister to the police? You cold, heartless monster. How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? Over money?" I took a sip of my coffee. "It is not over money," I said. "It is over the fact that she threw my daughter's birthday cake to the dogs and told her she was a mistake. So no, I will not be fixing this. Honestly, I do not care if her wedding collapses." Daphne lost her mind. She started screaming through the phone, calling me selfish, calling me a terrible sister, telling me I was just jealous that Valencia was getting married and I was a single mother. And then, in her blind rage, she made a massive mistake. She slipped up. "You do not understand what you have done," Daphne shrieked, her voice cracking. "You are not just ruining Valencia. You are ruining me. I remortgaged the house, Lorelai. I secretly took out a $20,000 loan against the house equity to pay for the designer flowers and the celebrity photographer. I told everyone you were the one funding it so we would look good. If this wedding does not happen, the deposits are gone and I will not be able to make the payments. I will lose the house because of you." I stopped. I stared at the wall. My own mother had put her entire financial future, the roof over her head, on the line just to buy flowers for a wedding they could not afford. And she had the nerve to tell the extended family that I was the one paying for it, just to stroke her own ego. "You did this to yourself," I said quietly. Daphne ignored me. She was hyperventilating now. "We are having a family meeting," she ordered, her voice trembling with desperation. "This Saturday. At my house. I have asked the manager from Maplewood Estates to come over so we can clear up this payment issue in person. You are going to be there. You are going to bring your checkbook. And you are going to drop this ridiculous police report, or you are no longer a part of this family." She hung up before I could answer. I set the phone down on the counter. A family meeting. She had invited the venue manager. She had invited the entire toxic family. She genuinely believed that if she got me in a room full of people, the social pressure and the guilt trips would force me to cave. She thought she could shame me into signing my life away. She had no idea who she was dealing with anymore. I did not cry. I smiled. I walked into my home office, opened the manila envelope, and turned on my printer. I made 5 complete copies of the police report, the forged loan documents, the IP address logs, and the joint account statements. I arranged them into 5 neat, organized folders. I was a forensic accountant. I lived for meetings where people tried to lie about numbers. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to give them a show they would never, ever forget. Will they ever learn that you cannot outsmart a spreadsheet? Saturday afternoon arrived with heavy, gray clouds hanging low over the city. It felt like the sky itself knew what was about to happen. I dropped Marigold off at Aunt Willa's house. Aunt Willa was my mother's older sister, but unlike Daphne and Jocelyn, Willa had always been grounded. She was sharp, observant, and she had never bought into the golden child narrative that protected Valencia. When I dropped Marigold off, Willa gave me a long, knowing look and simply told me to give them hell. I drove the 30 minutes to Daphne's house in complete silence. No radio, no podcasts. Just the steady rhythm of my tires on the pavement and the clear, cold focus in my mind. I played the upcoming conversation over and over in my head. I anticipated their arguments, their tears, their attempts to manipulate the narrative. The strong one in me was dead, but the protector in me was wide awake and ready for war. I parked down the street, grabbed my heavy leather briefcase containing the 5 folders, and walked up the driveway. The house looked exactly the same as it had during the engagement party, minus the expensive white silk and the valet parkers. But the driveway was packed with cars. It seemed Daphne had called in all the flying monkeys. I opened the front door and walked in without knocking. The living room was arranged like a tribunal. Daphne was sitting in the center armchair, looking pale but fiercely determined. Valencia was beside her on the sofa, her face buried in a tissue, crying softly. Holden was pacing back and forth near the fireplace, his arms crossed, looking furious and inconvenienced. Aunt Jocelyn and a few other cousins were scattered around the room, glaring at me as if I had just kicked a puppy. They were the jury, prepped and ready to find me guilty. And sitting awkwardly on a separate dining chair was a woman I did not recognize. She was in her late 40s, wearing a sharp business suit, holding a leather portfolio. This had to be Miss Kensington, the senior manager from Maplewood Estates. She looked extremely unhappy to be there, clearly dragged into a family dispute she wanted no part of. The room fell dead silent the second I stepped onto the living room rug. Every pair of eyes turned to me. The hostility in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Well," Daphne said, breaking the silence with a sharp, commanding tone. "I am glad you decided to show up and act like an adult." I did not say a word. I walked to the heavy oak coffee table in the middle of the room, set my briefcase down, and snapped the brass locks open. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet room. Holden stopped pacing and glared at me. "Look, Lorelei," he snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. "This whole thing has gone far enough. My mother is highly embarrassed. The venue is threatening us. Valencia is a wreck. You need to call your bank, reverse whatever petty fraud claim you made, and just pay the balance. We can sort out the repayment schedule later. Do not be so selfish." Selfish. The word bounced off my armor. Aunt Jocelyn chimed in right on cue. "Honestly, Lorelei, dragging an innocent business into your sisterly jealousy is pathetic. Family is family. You forgive, you forget, and you write the check. That is what decent people do." I looked at Miss Kensington. She cleared her throat and opened her portfolio. "Miss Lorelei," she said, her tone perfectly professional, but slightly condescending. "We received notice of a chargeback on the deposit. Your mother has assured me that this was simply a banking error on your end and that you are here today to provide a new payment method so we can reinstate the wedding date." Daphne smiled warmly at Miss Kensington. "Exactly. My eldest daughter has just been under a lot of stress lately at her job. She is going to fix this right now. Aren't you, Lorelei?" The entire room waited. They waited for me to lower my head. They waited for me to apologize for causing a scene. They waited for the strong, obedient daughter to pull out her checkbook and buy their love for the 100th time. I looked slowly around the room, making eye contact with every single person. I looked at Valencia, whose fake tears had stopped as she waited for her prize. I looked at Daphne, so smug and confident in her manipulation. Then I reached into my briefcase. "I am not here to write a check," I said, my voice echoing clearly off the walls. "I am here to share a story. Would anyone like some reading material?" I pulled out the 5 organized folders. I handed one directly to Miss Kensington, who looked at it with confusion. I tossed one onto Holden's lap. I slid one across the coffee table toward Aunt Jocelyn, and I dropped the last 2 right in front of Daphne and Valencia. "What is this nonsense?" Daphne demanded, staring at the closed folder as if it were a bomb. "Open it," I commanded. The authority in my voice surprised even me. Miss Kensington was the first to open hers. I watched her eyes scan the top page. Her professional, polite expression instantly dissolved into a mask of pure shock. "For the benefit of those who do not know how to read financial documents, I will summarize," I said, pacing slowly in front of the fireplace. 3 weeks ago, Valencia used a dormant joint credit card attached to my name to pay a $6,800 deposit to Maplewood Estates. She did not ask me. She did not tell me. Valencia sniffled loudly. "It is a family account. Mom said I could use it. It was just a technical error. I hit the wrong button on the website." I turned to her, my expression dead. A technical error. Hitting the wrong button on a drop-down menu is a technical error. But the document on the second page of your folders is not an error. Holden flipped the page. His face turned completely white. "What is this?" he whispered. "That," I said, pointing at the paper in his trembling hands, "is a fully executed application for an unsecured personal loan in the amount of $15,000. If you look closely at the highlighted sections, you will see my legal name. You will see my social security number. But if you look at the contact information, you will see Valencia's email address. And you will see the IP address timestamp, which I had traced. It leads directly to the Wi-Fi router sitting in this very living room." The room erupted into whispers. Aunt Jocelyn's jaw dropped. She looked from the paper to Valencia, her eyes wide with horror. "Valencia stole my identity," I continued, speaking over the rising murmur. "She forged my digital signature to take out a high-interest loan to pay for her catering and her dress. Combined with the venue deposit, she stole $21,000 from me. The document on the 3rd page is the official criminal police report I filed yesterday morning for felony identity theft and wire fraud." Daphne leaped out of her chair. "You called the police on your sister?" she shrieked, her face turning a dark shade of red. "Over a misunderstanding? I will disown you. I will cut you out of this family forever." I looked at her, entirely unbothered. "You cannot disown someone who already quit, Mom." Valencia was sobbing hysterically now, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I was going to pay it back. I was going to use the wedding gift money to pay off the loan. You are ruining my life because you are a miserable, lonely bitch." Before I could even respond to that, Miss Kensington stood up. The heavy leather chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Everyone froze and looked at her. The venue manager's face was completely drained of blood, but her eyes were burning with a furious, cold anger. Miss Kensington threw the folder down onto the coffee table. She turned slowly to look at Valencia, who shrank back into the sofa cushions. "A technical error, you said?" Miss Kensington asked, her voice dangerously low. "A little mistake?" Valencia nodded frantically. "Yes. I swear, I just got confused with the numbers." Miss Kensington let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You know, when I saw the name Valencia on the contract, I thought it sounded familiar. But I deal with hundreds of brides a year. I did not put the pieces together until I saw this police report and realized what kind of person you actually are." Daphne stepped forward, trying to play the peacemaker. "Miss Kensington, please, this is just family drama. We will find another way to pay you." "Do not speak to me," Miss Kensington snapped, holding up a hand to silence my mother. She looked back at Valencia. 2 years ago, my younger sister managed a boutique event space downtown. A young woman booked it for a massive charity gala. She paid the deposit with a cashier's check that turned out to be completely forged. It bounced, leaving my sister's business thousands of dollars in debt. The woman vanished and stopped answering calls. Miss Kensington leaned over the coffee table, getting right in Valencia's face. That woman was you. You are a serial fraudster. Maplewood Estates is not just canceling your wedding. I am personally ensuring that your name, your fiancé's name, and your mother's name are placed on the vendor blacklist for the entire state. No venue, no florist, no caterer will ever work with you again. And if the police call me, I will gladly give them the security footage of you signing that contract. The room was so quiet you could hear the wind outside. Valencia had stopped crying. She was staring at Miss Kensington in sheer, unadulterated terror. The fake victim act had crashed into a brick wall of reality. Miss Kensington picked up her portfolio, walked straight past Daphne, and slammed the front door behind her as she left. I stood there, watching the absolute destruction of Valencia's perfect world. But the show was not over yet. I turned my attention to Holden, who was staring at the floor, completely silent. It was time for the next act. Who was really pulling the strings? Holden had not moved an inch since Miss Kensington dropped her bombshell and walked out. He stood by the fireplace, clutching the folder I had given him, his knuckles turning white. The handsome, arrogant tech bro who had demanded I pay for everything just 10 minutes ago was currently calculating his own survival. Suddenly, he threw the folder onto the floor. He turned to Valencia with a look of absolute disgust. "Are you insane?" he yelled, his voice echoing in the silent room. "You stole your sister's identity? You committed a federal crime to pay for a wedding? My mother was right about you. You are nothing but cheap, desperate trash." Valencia let out a wounded scream. She jumped off the sofa and reached for his arm. "Holden, no. Please. I did it for us. You said your mother wanted a big wedding. I just wanted to make you proud. Do not put this on me." Holden roared, stepping back so she could not touch him. "I had no idea you were doing this. You told me your rich sister was handling the deposits. You lied to me. I am not going to prison because my crazy fiancé decided to play bank robber." He was putting on a fantastic performance. The outraged, betrayed lover. The innocent victim caught in the crossfire of a toxic family. Aunt Jocelyn was already nodding in sympathy for him. I slowly walked over to my briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Holden," I said, my voice cutting through his theatrical yelling. "You might want to hold off on the victim's speech." He stopped and glared at me. "What now?" he snapped. "When you hire a private investigator who specializes in digital forensics," I explained casually, waving the paper in the air, "you learn that deleted text messages are never really deleted. Especially when they are backed up to a shared iCloud account that Valencia conveniently linked to the old family iPad sitting in Daphne's kitchen." Valencia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Holden's arrogant expression completely shattered. I looked down at the paper and began to read out loud. 3 weeks ago. Holden to Valencia. Quote, "My mother thinks Maplewood is the only acceptable venue. We need it. I do not care how you get the money. Just use your uptight sister's information. She is loaded and she never checks her credit. We will just tell her it was a mistake later. Do whatever it takes." End quote. I looked up. Holden looked like he was going to vomit. I read the next line. Valencia to Holden. Quote, "I got the loan approved using her social. $15K is hitting my account tomorrow. We are saved." End quote. And Holden's response, complete with a champagne bottle emoji. Perfect. "See? I told you she was good for something. Just do not let your mom know." I dropped the paper onto the coffee table right next to the police report. "You knew," I said, staring dead into Holden's terrified eyes. "You did not just know. You actively orchestrated it. You manipulated her into committing a felony because you were too much of a coward to tell your snobby mother that you are completely broke." Holden looked around the room. The flying monkeys were staring at him with open mouths. Daphne looked like she was about to faint. He had been completely exposed. The shiny veneer of the wealthy, successful fiancé was stripped away, leaving nothing but a parasitic fraud. When a rat realizes the ship is sinking, it does not try to fix the hole. It jumps. Holden did not say a word to me. He did not look at Daphne. He turned to Valencia, who was weeping uncontrollably, holding her hands out to him in a desperate plea. "We are done," Holden said, his voice shaking with panic. "The wedding is off. Do not ever contact me again." He ripped the expensive engagement ring off Valencia's finger. She screamed as it scraped her knuckle. He shoved the ring into his pocket, turned around, and practically ran out the front door, sprinting to his car to escape the blast radius of the criminal charges heading his way. Valencia collapsed onto the floor, curling into a ball, sobbing so violently her entire body shook. Her fiancé had abandoned her. Her wedding was destroyed. She was blacklisted from every venue in the state. And she was facing 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud. Daphne finally snapped out of her shock. She dropped to her knees beside Valencia, wrapping her arms around her golden child. Then, she slowly turned her head and looked at me. The hatred in her eyes was toxic. "Look at what you have done," Daphne hissed, venom dripping from every syllable. "Are you happy now, Lorelai? You have destroyed your sister's life. You have destroyed my life. I am going to lose this house because of that secret loan. You are an evil, vindictive monster. You should have just paid the money. It is just money." "It is just money," I repeated softly. "You let her steal my identity. You let her throw my child's birthday cake to the dogs. And you still think I am the villain." I reached down and picked up my briefcase. I had delivered the truth. I had given them their paper trail. I was ready to walk out the door and never see any of them again. But suddenly, a calm, commanding voice spoke up from the corner of the room. "Sit down, Daphne," Aunt Willa said. Everyone turned. Willa had been sitting in a wingback chair the entire time, quietly watching the carnage unfold. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. She walked over to Daphne and looked down at her sister with a mixture of pity and deep, profound disgust. "Lorelai did not destroy your life, Daphne," Aunt Willa said smoothly. "You did. And since we are laying all the ugly family secrets out on the table today, I think it is time Lorelai knows exactly why you really called her to that engagement party." Daphne's face went from pale to ghostly white. "Willa, no. Shut up. This has nothing to do with that." Willa ignored her. She turned to me. Her eyes were sad, but completely resolute. "What was Daphne hiding?" Aunt Willa walked to the center of the room, stepping right over the scattered folders on the floor. She looked directly at me. "Lorelai, do you remember at the engagement party, when your mother pulled you into the hallway and told you she needed you to sign some old, boring trust fund documents from your grandmother?" I frowned, the memory flashing back. The way Daphne had acted so nervous, rushing me, telling me not to read the paperwork and just sign it when she brought it over. "Yes," I said. "She told me it was just standard banking stuff to close out an old account." Willa let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Daphne has been lying to you for 3 years. When your grandmother died, she knew exactly how Daphne favored Valencia and treated you like a workhorse. She knew Daphne would eventually squander everything. So, your grandmother set up a secret, locked trust fund. But she did not leave it to you, and she certainly did not leave it to Valencia." Willa paused, letting the silence build. "She left it to Marigold." My heart physically skipped a beat. "To Marigold?" "Yes," Willa confirmed. $30,000, locked in an educational trust fund meant for Marigold's college tuition. Your grandmother made me the secondary executor. The money cannot be touched until Marigold turns 18. Unless, of course, her primary legal guardian signs a specific legal waiver citing extreme financial hardship, which allows the funds to be liquidated early. The pieces fell into place with sickening speed. I looked down at Daphne, who was refusing to make eye contact with me, staring desperately at the carpet. "They did not invite you to the engagement party to celebrate," Willa continued, her voice echoing with disgust. "They invited you to butter you up. The papers Daphne was going to bring you to sign next week were not standard banking documents. They were legal waivers. Daphne and Valencia were planning to trick you into signing away your own daughter's college fund so they could cash out the $30,000 and use it to pay off the wedding debts and Daphne's secret mortgage." The room started to spin. The air felt incredibly thin. They did not just hate my daughter. They did not just throw her cake to the dogs. They were actively, maliciously plotting to steal her future. My own mother was trying to rob a 7-year-old girl to buy designer flowers for a daughter who had never worked a hard day in her life. The rage I felt before was cold and calculated. This rage was blinding white hot. It was the primal fury of a mother whose child had been targeted by predators. I dropped my briefcase. I walked over to where Daphne was kneeling on the floor. I grabbed her by the shoulders and forced her to stand up and look at me. She flinched, terrified I was going to hit her. "You tried to steal from my baby," I whispered, my voice shaking with a terrifying intensity. "You tried to steal from Marigold." Daphne started sobbing again, her hands shaking. "We were desperate, Lorelei. Holden's family was demanding a country club wedding. We were going to pay the trust fund back eventually. You have to believe me." I let go of her shoulders. She stumbled backward, crashing into the sofa next to Valencia. "I do not have to believe anything you say ever again," I said, my voice finally rising, ringing out in the silent room. "You are not my mother. Valencia is not my sister. You are parasites. Yunem kwa con tua cho choin. Now you can sit here and eat the garbage of your own ruined lives." I picked up my briefcase. I turned to Aunt Willa, who was giving me a small, proud smile. "Are you ready to go, Aunt Willa?" I asked. She nodded. "I have seen enough trash taken out for one day." We walked toward the front door together. Behind me, Daphne screamed my name, begging me to come back, begging me to call the police and drop the charges, begging me to save her house. Valencia was howling on the floor, calling for Holden. The flying monkeys were completely silent, trapped in the nightmare they had helped enable. I did not stop. I opened the front door, stepped out into the cool, gray afternoon air and closed the heavy oak door firmly behind me, shutting them inside their own self-made hell. I walked down the driveway with Willa. I took a deep breath. The air had never tasted so incredibly clean. The heavy, suffocating chain that had been wrapped around my chest for 34 years was finally, permanently broken. I was free. But what happened to the people I left behind? Here is the thing about numbers. They do not care about your excuses. They do not care about your tears, and they certainly do not care about your family hierarchy. The aftermath of that Saturday afternoon was swift and absolutely brutal. I never withdrew the police report. The detective followed the digital trail right to the iPad in Daphne's kitchen, just as I told him. Valencia was formally charged with felony identity theft and wire fraud. Because she had no prior criminal record, she avoided actual prison time, but she was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation and hundreds of hours of community service. Worse than the criminal record was the financial ruin. The online bank immediately sent the $15,000 loan to a predatory collections agency. With the exorbitant interest rates and late fees, Valencia's debt quickly ballooned to over $25,000. Her wages were heavily garnished. She had to move back into Daphne's house because she could not afford an apartment, and no landlord would rent to someone with a major fraud conviction on their record. Holden did not fare much better. Word of the spectacular breakup and the police investigation reached his employer. Tech companies do not like liabilities, especially liabilities involved in felony fraud cases. He was quietly let go from his vague startup job 2 weeks later. Last I heard, he moved back in with his snobby mother, Zara, who is currently telling everyone in her country club that Valencia was a psychotic stalker who tried to trap her innocent son. And then there was Daphne. The bank does not care if you remortgaged your house to buy designer wedding flowers. They only care if you make the monthly payments. With Valencia contributing nothing and the massive wedding deposits gone forever, Daphne quickly defaulted on the secret loan she had taken out. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. 6 months after the family meeting, Daphne was forced to sell my childhood home at a massive loss just to cover the debts and avoid total bankruptcy. She now lives in a tiny, cramped apartment on the bad side of town with Valencia. They spend their days arguing with each other, trapped in a miserable cage of their own making. I have not spoken to them since the day I walked out of that living room. They are dead to me. Aunt Willa formally transferred the management of Marigold's trust fund completely over to me. The $30,000 is sitting safely in a high-yield account, quietly growing for my daughter's future. To celebrate our newfound freedom, Willa, Marigold, and I took a 10-day vacation to Hawaii. I paid for the entire trip in cash, using a massive bonus I received at work for successfully uncovering a $1 million corporate embezzlement scheme. We stayed in a beautiful resort right on the beach. On Marigold's 8th birthday, while we were in Maui, we did not have a grocery store cake. We had a massive, custom-made chocolate volcano cake delivered right to our table by the ocean. She wore a flower crown and laughed so hard she got chocolate frosting all over her nose. Willa took a picture of us. It is currently framed and sitting on my desk at work. Every time I look at it, I remember what I fought for. For 30 years, I thought being the strong one meant carrying the heavy burdens of the weak people around me. I thought it meant being the shield that absorbed all their mistakes so they never had to feel the impact. I was wrong. Being the strong one does not mean being a human doormat. It means having the incredible courage to finally set the heavy load down. It means having the strength to look at toxic people, even if they share your blood, and close the door in their faces. My strength was never meant to protect Valencia from her own bad choices. My strength was meant to protect a little girl who deserved a beautiful blue birthday cake and a mother who deserved peace. They thought they could steal my money and my daughter's future because I was too polite to stop them. They forgot that the quietest people in the room are usually the ones taking the most detailed notes. So, I have to ask you, the quiet reckoners watching this. My extended family, Aunt Jocelyn and the cousins, still occasionally leave voicemails on my phone. They tell me that Daphne is sick, that Valencia is struggling, and that I should find it in my heart to forgive them and give them some money to help with their rent. They say I have proven my point and that holding a grudge makes me just as toxic as they are. Do you think I should answer their calls? Do you think I owe them a second chance after they tried to steal my daughter's college fund, or should I let them rot in the bed they made? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I read every single one of them. If this story resonated with you, if you are the one who finally stopped fixing everyone else's messes, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs the strength to walk away from a toxic table. Thank you so much for listening to Quiet Reckonings. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.